mother and father of Frankenstein. The mother, of course, is Mary Shelley, who wrote the book, and the father is Boris Karloff, who played the monster in the 1931 Universal Classic. And today, Friday, October 30th, is Frankenstein Friday. So you guys are very, very lucky to be here on this day. I'm so glad that I'm talking to you guys in Hoboken, New Jersey. Holy cow. Heidi, Harriet, and Hoboken. That's quite a combination there. So listen, let me tell you a little bit about myself, a little bit about Mary Shelley, a little bit about Boris Karloff, and a lot about Frankenstein. I was born and grew up in the 1960s. And in 1962, I got my very first Frankenstein model, and I fell in love. And it was great. In the 1960s, you had the models in the toy stores. You had Famous Monsters of Filmland, which was a huge magazine on the newsstands. And then, of course, you had the movies late at night at 11 o'clock. And it was spooky. It was kind of like, you know, when your parents went to bed, you went and you saw all these great movies. I grew up in the New York area, so I had a guy named Zachary. He was the horror host. And I've seen other people, and I'll tell you, Zachary was the best. He was great. He made jokes. He was funny. He was spooky. And he introduced me and millions of other kids to all these monster movies, Frankenstein, Wolfman, Dracula, and so forth. And just fascinating. I grew up really just enthralled with the whole thing. Now, let me tell you a little bit about Mary Shelley. Mary Shelley, very, very interesting woman. She was born in 1797. So when I created the holiday of Frankenstein Friday, I did it on purpose to celebrate the 200th anniversary of her book. 3 days after Mary Shelley was born, her mother died. So she had no mother at all growing up. Her father remarried, he was very busy, and he didn't spend much time with her. So she grew up almost as an orphan, a being or a creature without parents, which sounds a little bit familiar, but I'll get to that in a little bit. She was so loving and so caring and missed her mother so much. She actually used to take lunches to the cemetery and sit by her mother's gravestone and talk to her, and used to have conversations and used to say, "Mom, I miss you so much," and whatever. Well, she was a brilliant woman. As she got older, she ended up meeting and having a relationship with Percy Shelley. And in 1816, which is in the history books known as the Year Without a Summer. Now, I'll tell you what happened there. It ties into the story of Frankenstein. In 1860, a volcano erupted, and it created soot and clouds all over the world. It meant it prevented the sun from coming through. It was cold, wet, and damp for most of the entire year, and that's why it was called the Year Without a Summer. Well, back then, Mary Shelley, Percy Shelley, they didn't know that was going to happen. They had planned a trip to go to Lake Geneva in Switzerland. So they did that. But when they got there, they were forced inside. They couldn't go hiking or boating or have a picnic, and they were bored out of their minds. Well, at one point, a member of their group said, "Hey, why don't we have a ghost writing story to kill the time?" So they all went to bed that night, woke up the next morning. Each of them had a wonderful, scary, spooky story, except for Mary Shelley. She didn't have anything. But on the last day of the trip, the night before, she had a nightmare. And the nightmare was of a young man making another human being. And that was the beginning of Frankenstein. In fact, the actual first words of the story was, "It was a dreary night of November that I saw the accomplishments of my toils." And that was the start of Frankenstein. Well, it became the big hit. It won the best ghost writing story. When Mary Shelley got home, she wrote it kind of almost like a short story. And her husband said, "Mary, this is wonderful. This is too good. Make it into a full novel." So that's what she did. She expanded it. But if you are a fan of Frankenstein, the book, or a fan of the novel, what you should do is get a copy and go to chapter 5. And chapter 5 has that original line of, "It was a dreary night of November." Well, it took a couple of years, but it was published in 1818. And I think Heidi told me we have 18 people watching today. So it's perfect. It came out, it was successful, and it's never been out of print. It is probably the most successful, what they call Gothic novel of all time. And you have to realize something, because most people aren't aware of this. It was written or published in 1818. That was before all those other 19th century stories. It was before Jekyll and Hyde, Dracula, Hunchback of Notre Dame. all of them came after Frankenstein. In fact, this is my own opinion, but Bram Stoker, when he wrote Dracula, he did it in the form of what they call a letter, where one person is writing a letter to another, and that tells the story. Well, that's exactly what Mary Shelley did back at the beginning of the century. So I'm not saying Bram Stoker stole anything, but he used that same style. The other thing that Mary Shelley did in her novel, which most people aren't aware, is she really gave humanity to the creature. The creature or the monster was never given a name. So he was never called Frankenstein. It's just that every time you ever saw the title Frankenstein, they always showed the monster. So there was always that confusion whether it was the monster or Victor Frankenstein. The other thing a lot of people get confused is they call him Dr. Frankenstein. That's not true either. In the novel, it states that he was thrown out of medical school because he wanted to use human cadavers, and the school said, we can't do that. We can't do all your crazy stuff. So they threw him up, never graduated. In the films, in Frankenstein, never called doctor. Bride of Frankenstein, never called doctor. But son of Frankenstein. There was a Dr. Frankenstein, but he was the son of Frankenstein. So really, Victor Frankenstein never became a doctor. So anyway, so in the novel, Mary Shelley has the creature roaming the woods, trying to understand life and where he came from and what's going on, finds this beautiful cabin and a woodshed that is next to the cabin, and crawls under there to keep warm. And there's a little hole in between the cabin and the woodshed, and he can look inside, and he saw a young couple, and he saw an old man who was blind. So that's where the blind man came in, Bride of Frankenstein. So there really was a blind man, and he sat there for weeks and months watching this family and just fell in love with the family. Now, as a great writing tool that Mary used is the young girl was learning the language. So she was learning how to talk, and she was also learning how to read. So the young man was teaching the young woman, and what happened? The creature saw that too. The creature was able to then understand about writing and understand about reading. And the coat that he had taken from the laboratory when the creator ran away, there was the Diary of Frankenstein. And so he read that. So he knew exactly who created him and knew everything about Frankenstein. Well, at one point, he couldn't stand being alone anymore. He had to introduce himself to this family who he fell in love with. The young man, young woman went into town to get supplies. He knocked on the door, opened the door, and there was the blind man. Well, the blind man immediately couldn't see the creature, so welcomed him in. They became friends, and he was just so grateful to have someone to talk to. But sure enough, hours later, the couple come back. They are repulsed by his image, who was ugly. They started yelling and screaming. Of course, he ran out. He didn't know what to do. Accidentally, the cabin caught on fire, and he left. He was so upset, and he was so discouraged by the way other people were treating him. He said to himself, I have to go find Frankenstein. I have to go find this man who brought me into this world, and I'm going to hurt him like he has hurt me. So in the novel, almost every murder that is committed by the creature is done strictly out of revenge. That's how much he hated this man. He first kills Victor's younger brother, and then he kills Victor's best friend, and eventually he kills Victor's bride. So it's a very, very powerful story. Now, in 1931, incredibly, they were able to convey that story a little bit differently because of the time restrictions, whatever, but a wonderful, wonderful presentation of the story. Now, let me tell you a little bit about Boris Karloff. Boris Karloff was just an amazing actor. He came from England. His real name was William Henry Pratt, and he was born November 23rd in 1887. And he got to a certain age where he wanted to leave home. He didn't want to do what his family does. His family, all his brothers, his father, even his grandfather, all worked for the government service of England and was British counselors, and they were all stationed in China and in India. In fact, almost the entire Pratt family was born in India. His mother, his father, most of his brothers, but then they left there and they came back to England. The youngest was William Henry Pratt, and he was born in London, England. But he didn't want to be in the government service. He didn't have any desire at all. He wanted to be an actor. was something he kept kind of almost as a secret. Well, at age 21, he got a small inheritance from his mother. He flipped a coin. He said, I want to go act, but I can't do it here. I don't want to embarrass my family. So he decided either Australia, where they spoke English, or Canada, where they spoke English. It became Canada. And in 1910, he sailed to Montreal. He went there first as a farmer, and then he dug ditches, and then he helped up clean up after hurricanes. He did whatever he could to put food on his table, but he pursued acting, and he got hired. And for 10 years, he traveled all across Canada to Vancouver. And little by little, bit by bit, he got better and better. In fact, the first performance, they say, which is a great story, is he was paid $30 a week to be an actor, which was a great deal of money back then. And when the curtain went down on his first performance, they gave him $15 a week. That's because he was terrible. He didn't know what to do. But you know what? He loved it so much, he hung in there. And he worked backstage too. He did tickets. He built sets. He did whatever he could. He swept up at night. He just wanted to be an actor. Well, from Vancouver, he then went down to San Francisco. He got an agent, worked there a little bit. And then a friend of his says, hey, you ought to go down to Los Angeles. They got a new type of acting. It's called moving pictures. He figured he got nothing to lose. He jumped on the nearest boat. He went down to LA, and he started from the very, very bottom, being an extra. An extra, just for you folks to know, if we were doing a scene, let's say Heidi and I were sitting in a restaurant and we were talking and we have dialogue, and behind them there are waiters, there are people at other tables, people walking by. Well, those are all extras. They don't have a line to say, they don't have anything at all, but they just create the atmosphere. And that's how Boris Karloff started. In fact, the very first film was in a Douglas Fairbanks film. And he recalls saying he ran around the lot all day and got paid $5 a day. And by the end of the week, that was more money than he had made doing anything else. So he decided to stick with it. He got better and better. Same with when he was doing theater, and he worked his way up. And then at one point, they wanted him to go back to be an extra. And he really had a decision to make. He says, well, should I go back being an extra, or should I stay getting one or two lines and working my way up? And he decided, no, if I go back, then they're never going to give me the good parts anymore. So he actually applied to work at a cement company and became a truck driver. He didn't even have a driver's license, but he just wanted to be away from the movie business and wait for the phone to ring. And after a year, the phone did ring. He went back into films, and he never looked back. He was very, very fortunate. In 1930, he was making a film at the Universal Studios lot. He went to lunch, and all of a sudden across the room, he noticed a man looking and staring at his face. He didn't know what was going on. All of a sudden, the young man comes up and say, excuse me, but James Whale, the director, would like to have you come over for a cup of tea. Would you join him? And of course, Karloff knew who he was. He says, absolutely. And they sat and talked, and he offered him the role of the monster in Frankenstein. Now, this is very, very unusual because they had planned for Bela Lugosi to be the monster. In fact, the way that story goes, Dracula, which is where he was the star, Bela, was released in February of 1931. It became a huge hit. Of course, they wanted to follow up with it. They thought of several stories, but then they thought Frankenstein would be best. So right away, they thought of Lugosi. He went to do test makeup. He did not want the role. He said, first of all, I'm all covered up in makeup. Not only that, but I'm just grunting and groaning, and no, not for me. He turned it down. It became, in my opinion, the biggest mistake he ever made, because Karloff then was offered the role. Believe it or not, he was 44 years old. You would think most people at that age would just give up, because he was working film to film. He hardly fed and clothed himself, but he just wanted to stay in the films. And that film truly did change his life and change his career. By the end of 1931, he was a star. In fact, he became so famous, they used to use just one name, like they used Garbo. So they used Karloff. And he was remarkable. He took advantage of anything that came around. He was not only in the silent films and sound films, but then he did radio. In fact, for Harriet, I got to tell you, he was on the Ozzie and Harriet show in radio. And then he went and he did game shows on radio and variety shows. And then, of course, he did Lights Out and Suspense and all those horror things. And then in 1941, he was offered a role written just for him. And the name of the play was Arsenic and Old Lace. At first, he was a little hesitant. He didn't know whether he wanted to take the role or not, because even though he was a film star, he felt, Broadway's, I mean, that's really the top notch for actors. And he was a little hesitant, but at the meeting, when they pitched him the idea of doing the play, he said, well, we got to tell you, there's one line in here you may like. And he goes, what's that? They asked the killer, why did you murder the last man? And he goes, well, he said I looked like Boris Karloff. Well, he loved that. And he really did agree. There's only one person that can say that line, and that's Boris Karloff. He opened in the play. It became a huge success. It ran for several years. And he was so grateful. He went back to Hollywood. They found out now he could do comedy, because it was a comedy. And he just kept going with his career. And then he went back to New York in 1950. He was on Broadway again, this time in Peter Pan. And he played Captain Hook, which again was a great version. And he also had a radio show on WNEW in 1950. And then he started doing live television. It was very rare for a star of his size to do live television, but he did that. And of course, he loved young actors and writers and producers and directors. And he would then flip-flop. He would go from LA to New York and back and forth and keep working. He lived at the famous Dakota apartment building, which is in New York City on 72nd Street. And that's also where John Lennon lived. It's also where they filmed Rosemary's Baby. And then he made a film late in his career, which I think is one of the best films, called Targets. It was written and directed by Peter Bogdanovich. It was his very first film, and it was a huge success. And people really, really appreciated that film. Karloff basically played himself, where he played an aging horror star trying to fit in today's world. So let me tell you more about Frankenstein, which is just my favorite subject of all. Boris Karloff said he got letters from children more than anybody else, because they felt so sorry for the creature and so sorry that he was being ostracized and that nobody else would be his friend. So hopefully you can see this, but this is a picture of me when I was 7 years old with a Frankenstein puzzle. And that was the start. And then here's a picture of me that I call the man behind the monster. I've been very lucky. I've been on radio shows, television shows. I've been on the internet. There have been articles written about me. And I have had the opportunity to meet so many people that I grew up watching on television, including Zachary. He's a great guy. I also had a chance to meet Guillermo del Toro, John Landis, Orson Bean. And that is because I'm making a film documentary on Boris Karloff. And I'm doing this all throughout with the cooperation of Sarah Karloff, his only child. So in 1962, I started collecting. And guess what, guys? I never threw anything out. That's the key. So all you guys out there that collected baseball cards, I hope you still have them. All you women out there that collected dolls, I hope you still have them. Because if you go on eBay, it's amazing, really, truly amazing on how much some of these things are. I have to date, I believe, over 1,000 items. One of my most cherished was in 1969. I read that Boris Karloff was sick. I'm sorry, 1968. I read that he was sick, and I sent him a fan letter. And believe it or not, I got a response from Boris Karloff. I still have the envelope and the card. He acknowledged that he was sick, but he said, I'm fully recovered and back to work. And it was October 1968. And in February of 1969, he passed away. Some people told me that that card and that envelope is worth $50,000, but I will never part with it because it's something that connected me with Boris Karloff. I wasn't a big fan before, but that did the deal. So let me share some of my collection with you, but I'll tell you what, before we start, let me share some Frankenstein music. Now, I have a collection of music over here that I'm going to play for you guys, and hopefully you can play along and you try to guess what these songs are. But before we do those songs, I'm going to sing you my own song. That's right. I did my own Frankenstein song when I was a child, and it's called F You Are Fabulous. If you're fans of maybe like Perry Como did a very famous song called A, You're Adorable. Well, I took that, changed the music a little bit, changed the words a little bit, and this is my tribute to Frankenstein. It's called F You Are Fabulous. 1, 2, 3. F You are fabulous. R, you're remarkable. A, you're adorable too. N, you're so nice to me. K, you're so kind to me. E, you're enjoyably big. N, I will say again, S, you're so swell. T, it's terrific to know you well. E, you're excitable. R, you're incredible. N, you got a nice name. Oh, I wish that I could be made like you. Then everyone would be scared of me too. Boo! Oh, Frankenstein, Frankenstein, Frankenstein. I love you, you, Frankenstein. All right, let me play some songs for you now.
I was working in the lab late one night when my eyes beheld an eerie sight. For my monster from the slab began to rise, and suddenly, to my surprise, he did the mash. He did the monster mash. The monster mash. It was a graveyard smash. He did the mash. It got on in a flash. He did the mash. He did the monster mash.
That is the Monster Mash, if anybody was guessing out there. Ah, beautiful, I love it. Here's another one, see if you can tell what this one is. This is probably one of the most famous instrumentals ever. Anybody know? It's performed by the Edgar Winter Group, and it's called Frankenstein. Yeah, it was 7 minutes long. All right, guess this one. This was a TV theme song. You know what it is? No, it's not the Addams Family.
The Munsters?
It's the Munsters. Did you get that? Beautiful. This came on during the same time as the Addams Family, and it's Frankenstein and Dracula and vampires. All right, here's our next one. Now, the song is easy. It's Feed My Frankenstein, but who sings it? That's the question. Who is singing? Wow, you gotta be a real hard rock fan to know this. But his name is Alice Cooper. Alice Cooper. He's still around, still doing stuff. All right, here's this one. This is one of the most famous film scores of all time. Kind of creepy and kooky, but I love it. This was composed and orchestrated and conducted by Franz Waxman, who was a wonderful film composer, and this is from the movie Bride of Frankenstein. Here's the next one.
Another fella told me he had a sister who looked just fine.
There you go. You can twist if you want.
Instead of being my deliverance, she had a strange resemblance
To a cat named Frankenstein. I just threw that in. That's Sam Cooke, Another Saturday Night, but it has Frankenstein in it. All right, here is. This is from an off-Broadway play, which became a movie, which became a Broadway play, and usually they show it every midnight at film places all over the country. Does anybody know?
Rocky?
A Rocky Horror
Horror
Picture
Show.
Show. There you go.
Rocky Mountain Horror
And
Show.
by the way, the person that's singing on that is Susan Sarandon. And Susan Sarandon is from Edison, New Jersey. And that's where we're taping this right now, in Edison, New Jersey. Here's one more. Oh, no, that was it. Anyway, this was great. It was great to share all this music. Now, let me show you some of my collection. Here is a figure that, let me see if I can get this right. It looks like almost like a paper mache, but it's not. It's an actual statue. It's great, and I love it. Here, any outstanding person that wants to go celebrate Halloween has to have Frankenstein earrings. So these are Frankenstein earrings. This is a magnet that was sold, and it came out the same year that the U.S. Post Office did the stamps for all the monsters. There were 5 in total. There was Frankenstein, the Mummy, Dracula, the Wolfman, Creature from the Black Lagoon, and Karloff was honored with 2 because he played, again, not only the Frankenstein monster, but also the Mummy. Here is, for anybody that wants to eat out, here's a salt and pepper shaker with Frank holding both of them. So I had to get that and add to my collection. Down below here, we have, hopefully you can see, a Frankenstein trash can. And it opens up and you put trash in it. This is worth about $200 or $300 on the internet. Here is one of my favorites. This is a Frankenstein candle, believe it or not. It is completely wax. It's 18 inches tall. And look, you can take the head right off. And inside, you can see that it's still wax. But I painted it. Over the years, my collection became so big, I also did what I call Frankenstein Artwork. I'm the curator of Frankenstein Artwork. So here's some of that. This is a wonderful drawing of Frankenstein. And this is for Hot Wheels, which was a line of cars. And they actually had Frankenstein that on the top of the car, which was wonderful. Down below here, this is the company Tic Tacs. And they had different things over the years for Halloween, and they made them to look like the Frankenstein monster if you wanted Tic Tacs. Here is a picture of what they call Escape from Frankenstein, which was a board game. And then down below is a cutout of paper dolls where you could take the cutout and put it over Mary Shelley to have her look like the monster. And then, of course, I have some cardboard figures because you can't have Halloween without cardboard figures. So this one is pretty tall. It's over 6 foot. And this was used for selling the DVD and the VHS of Frankenstein when they came out. And then we here have a Frankenstein figure who I've been told likes to dance. Let's see. And then here we have one more Frankenstein cutout. And this is the one that's used a lot with Universal Studios. That's the look that they use. Now, besides doing all this stuff, I also have created things. I created Frankenstein Friday, which we're celebrating today. And I also created this. It is called the Frankie Award. And what I did is I took the Frankenstein model. I painted him all gold. I put him on a wooden plaque. And then down below, I have a little name thing here. And I give it to people who love the Frankenstein story and keep it going. And 2 years ago, I gave it to Oscar-winning director Guillermo del Toro, who made The Shape of Water. And he loved it. He said he was going to put it on his mantle right next to his Oscar. So I've had so much fun talking about Frankenstein. Does anybody have any questions out there? Would anyone like to know anything else?
I'm so glad. Hi, Dr. I'm so glad you brought up Zachary. I wonder how many people remember him. I remember coming home from school and turning him on, and he would have brains that, you know, and there would be some kind of a dead body there. Fantastic. Is he still alive? You spoke as though he were alive.
Well, let me ask you a question. What is your first name and where did you grow up?
Oh, Dina in the Bronx.
Okay, yeah. No, unfortunately, he passed away a couple of years ago, but believe it or not, he lived to be 96. Every single year, he attended a huge convention called Chiller Theater. In fact, it still goes on. It'll be in Parsippany this year because of the virus. Unfortunately, it was canceled. They have one in April and one in October. So they both were canceled, but I believe next April it will be going on. But here's the fun thing. They have old movie stars, old TV stars, and of course they have people that love the monsters. You can go around, you can buy models and toys and gifts, things that you thought don't exist anymore. But it's a great, great convention. It's called Chiller Theater. And again, go online in April. It's usually the last weekend of April and the last weekend of October. But yeah, wonderful guy. He was very, very funny, and I really enjoyed him. So thanks so much. I'm so glad you appreciated him.
Sure.
Oh, by the way, and he also received the Frankie Award.
Oh,
So he got it too. All right. Anybody else?
I just want to say hooray. You did such an amazing presentation. I'm so inspired. Thank you. And I hope your wounds heal.
Yeah, it's just a flesh wound. No, it'll be fine. But now, what's your first name and where are you from?
Oh, my name is Jane,
Okay.
and I'm living in Hoboken for more than 15 years.
But where did you grow up?
Oh, grew up in New York, Long Island, and Queens before that.
Oh, that's great. Well, here's the thing that I think is so terrific about the story of Frankenstein is it was written by an 18-year-old girl. I mean, an 18-year-old girl to write a story that has never been out of print. And here's the great thing. Have you read the novel?
I have not.
You should. You should get it. And here's the wonderful thing. She leaves it perfect for a sequel. The monster does not die. The monster just floats away. So somebody out there, maybe you, can write the sequel. Because let me tell you about the Frankenstein family. There were 3 boys. Everybody knows about Victor because, of course, he made the creature. William was the youngest boy, and he was the first murder that the creature did. But the third brother, everybody forgets about the third brother, Ernest. What happened to Ernie? It was like my 3 sons. What happened to Ernie? So if you write a sequel, you got to have Ernie and the monster get together.
Dr. Frank, this is James.
James, where are you from? Where'd you grow up?
I grew up on Long Island also, Nassau County.
Beautiful. What do you got?
I forget the plot exactly. Why does the monster kill people out of revenge? For what reason?
Well, again, I explained it, but I'll tell you again. In other words,
I missed it.
No, that's okay. In other words, the creature was so upset that nobody wanted to deal with him strictly because of his appearance.
I see.
So to me, it's a great story about prejudice. Strictly
Right.
because of his looks, people shunned away. They thought he was a murderer. They thought he was terrible. So he said to himself, this Victor Frankenstein has ruined my life. I'm going to ruin his life.
I
So
see.
it almost became a game of cat and mouse where he started killing people. And then Victor Frankenstein started chasing him, and he would leave just enough evidence to know where he was next and next and next. And they went literally all over the world, Victor Frankenstein chasing the monster to kill him. But eventually, Victor dies in trying to kill him. The monster actually is there to see that, actually cries, because he says, my father is dead.
I
But then
see.
floats away on an ice raft, and you never see him again.
I see. Thank you.
Yeah, so much more terrible than the film, because in the film, he really does have, in the film, if you recall, he kills first Dr. Waldman, who's about to cut him up into pieces. So that's really out of, self-defense. He kills Fritz, the little hunchback guy with the torch, because he was torturing him. So that was out of self-defense. The little girl was strictly a mistake. The little girl was at the lake with the flowers. The monster thought the girl would float like the flowers. And unfortunately, she was murdered. So yeah, so the film portrays it a little bit different. The film also introduces, which of course Mel Brooks did a wonderful takeoff, of having an abnormal brain. So that was the excuse on why the creature became a monster, because he was given a criminal brain, not a real name. And for those Mel Brooks fans out there, it was called Abby Normal.
Yes.
Abby Normal. All right, go ahead. Who's next?
I want to thank you so much for this presentation. I joined a bit late and I didn't hear the introduction, but I wanted to ask you, what inspired you to have this great interest in Frankenstein?
Well, first of all, I got to find out what's your first name and where you're from.
I'm Regina and I grew up in Boston. I'm from Boston, Massachusetts, but I've been living in Hoboken here for almost going on 15 years.
All right, Regina, give me your personal phone number and we'll start the talk all over again. No, I'm kidding. All right, what was your question? I'm sorry, say that again.
What inspired your great interest in Frankenstein?
Well, I was very similar to all the children out there that saw the film. I was just so taken by the treatment of the creature, and that to me, he was innocent and he didn't deserve to be treated the way he was. And I think when you're a child growing up, at some point, people do feel they're all alone. They feel that, nobody else wants to be with them. So you relate to that. So yeah, that was really it. And then of course, just the whole image and the whole aura of it. And then as I got older, I really fell in love with the actor Boris Karloff. Just a tremendous man. He never gave up. He was 44 when he made Frankenstein. You'd figure by then most people would have said, well, I'm not going to make it and move on. But great man. He was one of the founders of the Screen Actors Guild. And his daughter's wonderful to talk to. And so, yeah, it's been a love affair for not only the film, but also the actor that was in the film. And my two favorite comedy horror films are Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein and Young Frankenstein.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I also want to say to everyone that I've read the book twice, and I think it's such a great read, and it's a really fast read. It won't take you long at all, but it's a beautiful book.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I'm glad you liked it. Like I said, just so powerful, and really was the precursor of every other story ever written.
Did anyone ever play Frankenstein as successfully as Boris Karloff? I mean, I know there were other people that played the part, but.
All right, well, first I got to know your first name and where you're from, where you grew up.
Where I grew up, I'm Margot, and I'm from, well, basically New York.
Okay. All right, Margot, how are you?
I'm fine.
Well, here's the thing. I love when anybody wants to spend several $1 million to make a Frankenstein film. And after doing it, people will always say, it was okay, but there was nobody like Karloff.
Yes.
So Karloff really was the epitome, but talk about actors. I don't know if people realize, but in 1994, Robert De Niro tried it.
Oh my God.
In 1974, it was Peter Boyle in Young Frankenstein.
Peter Boyle is the one I remember, yeah. Right.
So a lot of people have tried to make the film. In fact, the story is Peter Boyle met his wife when they were making Young Frankenstein. So that film really made a difference to him. In fact, later years when he was on Raymond, Everybody Loves Raymond, there's a funny Halloween episode where he comes in dressed as the Frankenstein monster, and it's very, very cute.
Okay, good. All right, very cool.
I have a question. I'm Diana from New York. I was just
Diana,
wondering if you had any opinion. I don't know if you got to see the National Theater's production where they alternated Benedict Cumberbatch and John Miller playing the role of Frankenstein. Did you get a chance to see that? And do you have any opinion on those performances if you did?
Yes, I did. And very, very terrific. In fact, just a wonderful imagination to do that, to have the two actors, play and switch roles, which again is another way you can look at Frankenstein, that the monster was the alter ego of Victor, and in a way they were both the same people. Yeah. But just again, to be able to think that that's so important, and to have actors of that stature be able to do that, just wonderful. I mean, I'm still the old time guy. I still like the flat head, the scars and the bolts in the neck, but no, it was wonderful. So yeah, that was great. Unfortunately, I think they only did it in London, but I believe it was filmed. So I think
you could see it during the pandemic. They've been showing it.
Yeah.
And they show you both versions, and it's amazing to watch both of them and see just the subtle differences that the two different actors bring to the role.
I would have loved to seen it in person, but I couldn't get over to England. But thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah.
Dr. Frank, there's a question from a patron named Alexander, and he'd like to know how many copies of the book you have and what's the oldest edition you have, I believe.
Okay, well, here's the great thing. Frankenstein is in public domain. And that means that anyone can do a story, and it can be published by anyone. And for a while, I think I had about 75 copies, most of them paperback, but I bought them strictly for the cover because everyone would do the cover a little bit differently. I live close enough to New York City where I can go to the public library. In fact, if anybody lives in the area of New York City, which I think some of your people do, please go to the library. They actually have an original edition of Frankenstein. So yeah, but I I don't come close to that at all. But no, there's the actual, one of the first editions of Frankenstein is at the public library. And I believe it's in what they call the Shelley room. So if you're in the area, or call ahead, but yeah, you can actually see it and it's wonderful.
Dr. Frank, it's
Yeah.
Dina. Yes. No, I just want to say, you know, the Kenneth Branagh version, it was okay. But the part that I loved was when Robert De Niro as Frankenstein is on the boat and he's at the foot of Dr. Frankenstein and he says, and he dies and he says, he was my father.
Right.
It was so emotional, I have to say, so effective, I thought. So it was a long film, but.
Well, let me tell you my opinion of that film. First of all, it bothered me a little bit that when they promoting the film, they kept saying, this is not the Karloff version. We're not going to be silly and have a flat head and all. So that bothered me a little bit. What I love, though, about it is that Branagh stayed true to the novel and did old things, did new things. And then at the end, it's completely different, because at the end, I don't want to spoil it for anybody, but at the end, the monster kills the bride, as what happened in the novel. But then Victor Frankenstein says, well, then I've got to bring her back to life. So he ends up bringing the bride back to life. And of course, she's a monster as well. So that was cute. So yeah, I thought it was well done. And again, I loved it. 1994, that one was called Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. And it was produced by Francis Ford Coppola, who the year before had done Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Dracula, yeah.
But it was funny that they built it as Mary Shelley's Frankenstein when it, as you said, it goes way off towards the end there.
Right. But, well, and I'll tell you the reason for that. In other words, you can't copyright a title. So they could have called it Frankenstein, but by making it Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, it then made it stood out. And it also was truer to the book. So yeah, so the title, I think they did that on purpose.
And what do you think of The Bride of Frankenstein and Elsa Lanchester?
Well, I think that what Universal should do is they should re-release both Frankenstein and The Bride of Frankenstein and combine them like they've done. Some theaters have done this with The Godfather, and they call it The Godfather Saga, and they put the two films together. But Bride of Frankenstein, some people consider the best horror film ever made. And that musical score really adds so much to it. And Karloff's, adding dialogue, which he was completely against, by the way. Karloff did not want the monster to speak, but James Whale insisted upon it. And there's humor in it too, but there's also some very powerful imagery. I mean, at one point, Whale makes the monster look almost like the Christ figure by putting him up on a cross. So, he really gets away with some things, but I thought a wonderful film.
A quick question about this. There's a book called Mary Who Wrote Frankenstein.
Okay.
By Linda Bailey. Have you heard of it?
No, I have not. But I did see the recent film that came out, I think about 2 years ago. I think Dakota Fanning played Mary Shelley. And I thought it was very well done. Very well done. But no, I haven't.
Sorry.
Yeah. If you get a chance, you should see that film. I believe it's called Mary Shelley. And it's,
that would be it would be interesting to think about that story, the story of that you told, of how it was created.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, again, you go in the history books, 1816. It's called The Year Without a Summer. And it resulted in Frankenstein. So,
yeah.
All right, Hardy, are we done? Are you there, Hardy?
We're done if you're done. Are you done?
Oh, sure, I'm done. You done? Well, I still have to call that one woman and do the talk all over. But yes.
Okay, let me see if there's in the chat. Is there a question? I think you answered them.
Yeah, I asked it for Alexander. Mm-hmm.
The story about Boris Karloff's name change.
Mm-hmm.
You asked that?
No.
Well, let me tell you again. Again, he was born William Henry Pratt. His family was very important in the government service. and he didn't want to use that name. First of all, back then, Pratt, there was a phrase called the Pratt fall, where you slip on a banana peel. So he thought that wouldn't work. And then, of course, again, he didn't want to embarrass his family. So he decided to come up with a name, and he made up the name Boris Karloff. And then, of course, years later, it was perfect. Perfect. I think he did it because Karloff is like a Russian name. And back then, there was a lot of very famous Russian acting teachers. And I think maybe he wanted to be associated with the Russian community of acting people. And so that's why he picked the name. But by the way, he never legally changed his name. Whenever he would sign documents, he would always sign William Henry Pratt, AKA Boris Karloff.
It's interesting. Okay, thank you.
All right,
Thank
Heidi.
you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Thank
All right.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye,
Bye-bye.
everyone. Bye, Dr.
Bye.
Frank.
Bye-bye.
Sure.
That was great, Heidi.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Heidi.
Yeah.
Thanks for
Thank
having
you.
us.
Oh, my pleasure. So I'll do something in for December, okay?
Excellent.
Does that work? And also I'll we'll have to do the registration again. So I'm glad that worked.
No worries.
Okay?
Yeah, that's not a problem.
Stay healthy, everybody. Stay
You
healthy.
too. You too.
Bye.
Well, bye, Dr. Frank. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, Dr. Frank.
Bye now. Thank you.